Could George Russell beat Lewis Hamilton this season? George Russell is in a good car for the first time in Formula 1. Well, maybe disregarding that brief but disappointing race in the Mercedes in 2020. Now, he's held up as a driver with massive potential, who just hasn't been able to quite show it yet. And going up against Hamilton for this season is really going to show us what he's made of. But do we really think he can beat Hamilton? Could this 24-year-old driver really take on a 7-time world champion? Well, let's go over why I think he's going to have a really good go at it. So there is no doubt that George is a great driver, but 2 seasons of battling his teammate for P19, and sometimes better, doesn't really show his talent. He made his F1 debut in 2019 with a very dodgy car, then spent 2020 with a slightly less dodgy car, and 2021 with a car that could actually compete with some of the midfield. Throughout his entire 3-year spell at Williams, he has thoroughly outperformed both his teammate and the car he was sat in, which of course we all know. But there have been a couple of really clear examples of his talent. We all remember that magic lap in Spa to secure a 2nd place finish, where in a slower car he outpaced Lewis, and it takes a pretty special driver to do something like that. Then there was the race in Turkey, where he was less than 1/10 of a second off pole, pulled an outrageous overtake on Bottas, and had the measure of him on race pace, all in a car that he had driven for less than 3 hours. But really, we are kind of limited in terms of results where he was in a good car, at least in F1, but not if we look a little bit further back in his career. George was a fast lad in cars, and according to Alex Albon, he was the one that everyone wanted to beat. He started in 2006 and spent the next 7 years winning a lot. The British Championship, the British Open, then KF3 2 years in a row, and it goes on. After that, he made his single-seater debut in Formula Renault, where he wasn't in an amazing car, but still got some good results. Then in Formula 4, he won the British Championship before moving to European Formula 3, where he was battling with drivers like Leclerc, Giovinazzi and Norris. He finished 6th overall, but runner-up in the Rookie Championship, only behind Leclerc. GP3 was when things really kicked off. He signed for ART, a great team in the lower formulas. He clinched the title in the penultimate race with a significant points advantage, and that epic season got him a seat in DTM for the following year. But it also earned him a spot in the Mercedes Junior program, which then went on to get him tests in a Force India and the Mercedes, meaning he then decided to take a seat again with ART in Formula 2. So he binned off DTM, which I guess you would if you're going into F2. Now, the F2 grid was really strong in 2018, and George was battling with drivers like Norris, Albon, De Vries, Latifi, Delatraz, Aitken and Ticktum. Now, this was an epic battle over the season, mainly between They Race Me So Hard, Albon, and Norris, which Russell actually won, landing him a seat at the Mercedes-powered Williams team. And imagine that, finally getting to F1 with backing from Mercedes, and then being put in that dog-slow Williams. I actually really love Williams, but you have to admit, that wasn't their best car. But to be fair, he really pushed it hard, beating Kubica, who is no slouch, in every qualifying session as well as most of the races. Then 2020 was better, but the most interesting thing was that race in Bahrain. He only had free practice to get up to speed and then only lost pole to Bottas by 0.03 of a second. He then did Bottas off the start and went out to pull a lead. And don't forget, this was a car where he still had to ask Bono which button did what on the steering wheel. Then there was a ballsy pass around the outside of Bottas that I wish I could show you. We can only show press footage. And that confirmed to me that he was the real deal. That was a roller coaster of a race. I was so gutted when Merck bottled those pit stops. And that same ability to outperform a slower car, then move up to a front-running car, has been the story that so many great drivers have lived through. Senna at Tolman, Schumacher at Jordan, Alonso at Minardi, and Vettel at Toro Rosso. And they have 16 world championships between them. Although one great driver missing here, of course, is Hamilton, who stepped straight into a quick car from the get-go. But we can't take this look at a driver without looking at his driving style. He's actually pretty similar to Hamilton. Very smooth on the steering wheel for the most part. The only thing is that he makes a fair few corrections at the wheel. He didn't actually do this quite as much in the Mercedes, so it looks like the choppy steering is more due to the lack of refinement in the Williams rather than George. The one thing that I like is that he's also very comfortable in wheel-to-wheel battle, much more bold than Bottas was, but I suppose that doesn't take too much. Another important thing is that he is very intelligent with how he manages a race, treating the tyres well, picking the right battles, and managing the car generally. Now, it's worth mentioning George's record isn't completely clean. Remember Imola? A couple of times actually. But in this case, Russell was overtaking Bottas in the Mercedes car and they came together. Now you can argue whose fault it was, but running over and tapping Bottas's helmet afterwards, well, that's just not a great look. Then add the shout over the radio of, is he trying to kill us both? And well, Toto is going to be smashing a few more pairs of headphones. But only a few days later, George apologised, and it seems that didn't have an effect on the deal for this year. But to be fair, that is the only time he has lost his temper publicly in Formula 1. And well, Lewis and other drivers can lose theirs from time to time as well. George has always been very good with the media, very calm on the radio, as well as making very diplomatic calls, even when things haven't gone his way. All the way through his tough years at Williams, he was optimistic but reasonable with how he explained things. Prost, Senna, Schumacher, Hamilton, and the list goes on. They all had an ability to remain calm and process a lot of information, all whilst driving on the limit. And I think Russell has that too. But to be fair, so does Hamilton, Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc, Alonso, and a few others. So will Russell beat Hamilton in 2022? That is the big question. And I would say yes, on occasion, but probably not over the whole season. Hamilton has years of experience in the team and in that car. But there is one good thing for Russell. These cars are going to be very different in 2022 in how they feel, drive, and ultimately how the drivers extract the most speed from them. With more grip coming from the floor of the car, they're more similar to Formula 2 cars, which Lewis hasn't driven for 17 years, rather than 3 years for George. 17 years. That's how long it's been since I tested them too. That's a long time ago. And to be clear, I think they will be very similar on pace. Actually much closer than Bottas and Hamilton were anyway. Over the season, I think Lewis will have the experience and composure to bring it home. Unless, of course, Verstappen destroys them. But that's a question for another day. You should check out these videos where I go over all the changes in the latest 2022 Formula 1 cars. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.